Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Slavery Archive Book Club. My name is Ana Lúcia Araújo. I am professor of history at Howard University. I host the book club along with Alex Hill, who is also here with me, and also Jessica Johnson from... Okay, sorry. And then this echo that you just heard is just here. It's not going to be on YouTube. Then we also have as co-hosts Jessica Johnson from Johns Hopkins University and Vanessa Holden from University of Kentucky. She's not here with us today, but she was preparing this session with us during several weeks. And today we're very glad to be here to discuss and celebrate the book Afro-Catholic Festivals. Let me see if you can just see clearly on camera. Afro-Catholic Festivals in the Americas, Performance, Representation, and the Make of Black Atlantic Tradition, that was edited by Cécile Fromont. And this is a book that was published then 2 years ago at Penn State University Press. And just the paperback version was just published then last month. And today we're here not only with Cécile, but also with all the contributors to this book that is an edited book. First of all, then I will introduce Cécile, and after she'll give a presentation, then contextualizing how this book, the idea of the book emerged and how the different contributors participated in this enterprise. And I also let you know who are the contributors of this book. Then Cécile Fromont, she is an associate professor in the Department of Art, of History of Art at Yale University. And her first book, if you do not know, you should get it, is titled The Art of Conversion, Christian Visual Culture in the Kingdom of Congo. It was published in 2014 by University of North Carolina Press for the Omohundro Institute for Early American History. And this is a book that received several prizes, including then the 2017 Arts Council of the African Studies Association, Triennial Arnold Hubin Outstanding Book Award. Also was named the 2015 American Academy of Religion Best First Book in the History of Religions, and also received other books, other awards, including an honorable mention in the 2015 Melville Herskovits Award of the African Studies Association. Her next single author book is coming next year with a Penn State University Press, and is titled Images on a Mission in Early Modern Congo and Angola. Also, she received several fellowships, including then from the Center for Advanced Study in Visual Arts, the Michigan Society of Fellows, and more recently then a fellowship of the Paris Institute for Advanced Studies. And Cecilia then, she is currently developing two lines of research that investigate then areas of intersection between visual culture and material culture, religion, and knowledge creation in cross-cultural environments of early modern Africa, Latin America, and Europe. Then I invite you also, then perhaps we can put in the chat a link for Cecilia's profile and also her personal website, and for you to know more about her great work. And we have then in the book several chapters that I hope you read the book, and if you didn't, I hope that you are going to get the book. Then the different chapters then have each one a different author. The introduction is then authored by Cécile Fromont and Michael Yanaga. You have then three other chapters in part one with Jeroen de Wolf, also Kevin Downson, Miguel Valério, Lisa Voigt, Gina Ferreira Furtado, also a chapter by Cécile Fromont, and Diane Stewart is also an author of one chapter, and Michael Yanaga is the author then of the final chapter. And I hope I didn't make many errors pronouncing your names, and all of you will have time to talk a little bit about the chapters that you authored. Now then, Cécile, the floor is with you, and welcome everybody.
Thank you so much, Ana Lucia, and thank you to, of course, all of my dear colleagues in the Slavery Archive Book Club for the invitation to come and talk about this book. I'm really excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share screen here. And I'll start here. So my first thanks, of course, is also to the contributors of the book, most of whom are here today and who will be joining our conversation. And do not hesitate, for example, to direct your questions or comments to them for general questions, and also for items that may regard their particular chapters. And again, I want to express my thanks and repeat their names. Jeroen de Wolf, Kevin Dawson, Miguel Valerio, Lisa Voigt, Junia Ferreira Furtado, Diane Stewart, and Michael Yanaga, and I'm so grateful for their participation in this project. I want to thank also Penn State Press, and in particular the Africana Religion series, who took on the project. And as many of you know, it's not necessarily easy to convince an editor to publish an edited volume, but they were brave enough to take us on, and I hope they don't regret it in this case. And they also did a really great job in the production, and I'm really grateful for this, and in particular for having a paperback edition now that makes the book much more accessible and useful, I hope. And today, of all day, the 22nd of May, Vendée May, I want to thank our ancestors who, on this day in 1848, rose for one last time against enslavement in Martinique and brought about abolition in my home island. Here on the screen, I brought you one of the many memorials that exist on the island about the event, and this one is by Hector Charpentier, in Le Prêcheur. It's a town on the northeast of the island. So this monument to Vendée May, the 22nd of May, celebrates the day in which, no longer waiting for the laws to come from France to abolish slavery, the people of the island rose and claimed it for themselves, so that we celebrate on this day abolition taken and not given to us and our ancestors. On the monument here, along with the broken chains and the limbs that are reaching for freedom, we have also a drum at the bottom left that you can see. And that drum plays an important part in that story of abolition because it is referring to the events that spark that final uprising, in that the day before, one man that was who was held as a slave in Saint-Pierre, near the capital, played his drum and then was punished for it. And all around him rose against the punishment. And so I think it is very appropriate that we spend some time together today reflecting on those kinds of festive traditions that were and are at the core of Black Atlantic history. The book that we are discussing today started as a conference at the Yale Institute for Sacred Music in 2015. And I'm very grateful to the Institute for having given us the opportunity to bring a range of scholars from Brazil and the United States together for that one day to begin discussing this topic. As you see from the poster, the roster of people who participated in the conference and the authors of the book are not exactly the same. And it is a testament to one important aspect of the topic that I want to highlight from the get-go, is that it is part of a much larger conversation, right? This book brings together a range of perspective, and I think it achieves a lot. It covers a lot of ground, but it is really very much a small section of what we could say on the topic. And also we remember today Linda Rodriguez, who is no longer with us and whose participation in the conference was so crucial and inspiring to us all. At the core of the conference were a set of interrogations, and really starting with the congadas, so congados, which are festivals in which a group of Africans and Afro-descendants elect their king and queens as part of a sodality or confraternities in Brazil. So, and this has been happening since the era of slavery and continue to take place today. And the idea of the conference was to bring together studies of these events and their cognates elsewhere in the Americas. For example, the Pinkster traditions that Jeroen de Wolf has studied so vibrantly, or San Juan Congo in Venezuela, the Dia de los Reyes in Cuba, etc., who all of events that are related to this congadas, and we wanted to explore exactly how. The other set of interrogations was the fact that these festivals were all tolerated during a slavery era. Sometimes they were even welcomed by the slaveholding class as proof of conversion or as kind of necessary moment of relative freedom that would allow for broader social control. But at other time, they were seen with suspicion and even forbidden, although never for very long. And so these posed immediately a set of questions about the nature and origins of these similar but different festivals and festive traditions hemispherically from North to South America. Questions about their role in shaping Black Atlantic religious, political, and social tradition, and also the potential that their studies would have in thinking anew or thinking better or thinking in richer ways about the Black Atlantic, its origin, its trajectory, its textures, about African-American religiosity. And I think very early in our conversation, we adopted the term African-American hemispherically as talking about the Americas as one continent. And also the to think anew about Black performance and Black celebration. We've been thinking lately about Black joy also. And that's a history that it is participating in tracing. And so this conversation started at the conference, and then I continued to carry it by inviting the participants to write for the book, and then some of them could not do it, or did not do it. And then new interlocutors emerged that completed the conversation. And that's what gave birth to the book. And so I won't summarize the book itself, just to have a look together at the pages of the table of contents. It is organized in 4 parts around different themes that are thinking about different ways to approach those performances. But one of the features I think that I hope was clear to you as you were reading, that they're really integrated and really in conversation with each other. So all of the authors really engage with the rest of the material, and think that made for a much richer book. And then an important part of the book for me, and I will talk about it a little bit later more, was an introduction that I hoped could be very kind of pedagogical, and also kind of very much of a summary and of the historiography, and placing the conversation within kind of these perimeters that are sometimes very clear from inside the field, but that can at other times be a little elusive for newcomers, or for people coming from the perimeter of these questions, in particular of Black Atlantic religious cultures. And Michael Yanaga very kindly joined me in writing the introduction, and the introduction is immensely better for it, because I thought it was important in the spirit of the book to have a multidisciplinary perspective in the introduction itself, and to set up the conversation kind of as the broad question and framing for our book. So instead of summarizing the book, which I hope you have read or will read very soon, I have brought in 3 different kind of themes that I want to touch upon, and they are of unequal length. So the first theme would be lengthy, and the third a much shorter, but that I would like to propose to you as a way to frame my approach to editing that volume. So first, some thoughts about the argument. So what I think, what I hope, what I believe the book has demonstrated together. Well, first, I think it has shown the ways in which Catholicism was a space of autonomous African and African-American cultural expression, a space of autonomous African and African-American social organization, as well as political empowerment, right? And that instead of thinking of Catholicism as a tool of oppression, as something that was imposed from the outside to Africans and Afro-descendants, even within a slavery environment, we can and we should in part see it as this space of relative freedom. And so that makes it not only a foil against which, or in spite of which, Black spirituality grew in the Americas, but also in Africa, as the book is also bridging the 2 sides, the 2 shores of the Atlantic. And also that Catholicism and Christianity more generally is not only the domain of syncretic accommodation, right? It is not only a veil behind which a supposedly real Black Atlantic religiosity would be hiding, but very much a component of it. Another thing that I hope the book conveys is the Central African dimension of African American tradition, and in particular religious tradition, even if it has been less visible, because in part of its entanglement with Catholicism and Christianity at large, and also even if it has been less visible because of the historiography of Black Atlantic religions that have given more attention, absolutely deserved attention, but more attention to West African dimensions, in particular the Fon and Yoruba traditions that have been really at the forefront of the mind of some of the foundational text about African American religiosity. And finally, the third thing that I hope that the book does is that it shows that studying Black Atlantic tradition demands that we move beyond the boundaries that have made visible or even made invisible, or even at times have silenced its manifestations. So we need to go across imperial lines. We need to go across historiographic traditions. We need to work across established fields, fields that often were not established to study the kind of phenomenon that Black Atlantic tradition is and has emerged from. We also need to look beyond religious divides, in particular the Catholic-Protestant divide, as Diane Stewart has shown so well in her chapter that is so breathtaking in this regard. And then we need to challenge the archive by completing it, by questioning it, and sometimes by putting it in its place and recognizing that it can get us so far, and then we need to leave it behind if we need and we want, and we should go beyond what it allows scholarship to do. The second set of remarks I want to share with you is perhaps about results, and it's very much interrelated with issues of argument. And for me, what I hope the book achieves is to give us a better grasp, right, of the history of these particular sets of festivals and their contemporary significance. In the chapters, the authors have found new archives. They have also questioned all archives. They have made new sets of information and new sets of sources that allow for new questions. The book, together with all the chapters, I think has achieved his hemispheric view, right, where we can think about a Congo experience in North America against Congo experience in the Southern Hemisphere, and in a way that kind of bypasses a lot of those divides that I was mentioning in terms of historiography and empire and traditions. And also, I think it shows us and a way to have a vision of history that approaches chronology in the fullness of its many temporalities. It is very much going, I think every chapter is going against a historical accounts. Every chapter is very much grounded historically, but it is also keeping an eye, an open eye, and I think a generous eye to what the longue durée can tell us in ways that are really inspiring. And finally, as a last set of remarks, I hope to make this book a useful book. So the chapters are rather short they're bringing also English language discussions of some types of festivals and aspects of history that have been very much more written about in other languages, Portuguese and Spanish in particular. It's really, it was a big hope that we'll be able to bring this conversation into classrooms, in particular undergraduate classrooms, in a way that would be accessible and then there, present, ready for the grabbing to complete a syllabi on the range of topic. And the paperback edition that is, better priced, I hope will contribute to that. Along with the classroom, I was really hoping also that it would serve as a good starting point for research, in particular for our most junior colleagues, so our undergraduate scholars who are embarking on new research projects. So we have good quality images, and Penn State Press does really great art history books, and they've worked with their art history side of the press to make good quality reproduction of images. We included long quotes, we included musical notations, and also I hope you noticed at the end of each chapter there is a further reading section that I hope will serve as pointers to that further research, right? That these are indications of where to go as a next step in independent research in terms of finding the primary sources or the crucial secondary sources that can bring that nascent research topic into fruition. And then finally, the book is really methodologically diverse and rich. There are many different ways in which a similar topic can be approached. And I think in this book, because the authors have been so generous with their time and their attention and their curiosity, it has really worked well because the chapters talk to each other, and in so doing they really demonstrate that each methodology enrich each other, right? It does not repeat things, it does not contradict things, but on the contrary, it is greater than the sum of its parts. And so I'm really, really glad that this has happened in the book, and I'm really thankful for the authors to have been willing to take this on in a broader conversation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and to hearing any complementary comments also from my fellow authors. And I extend my thanks to them once more, and I'll stop sharing the screen now. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Then now the authors, then the contributors, you can intervene if you want. Otherwise, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and even for the contributors as well, if we have many people who want to talk, just click on reactions at the bottom of the screen and raise your hand. Like this, you can manage the questions, and you are going to see on YouTube as well. Okay, we have Lisa.
I'll start as a contributor, and just to say thank you to Cecile, thank you to Anna for this opportunity. And what you said in your comments, Cecile, about the book serving as inspiration for future research, I just wanted to share something that I think was such an integral part of it for me and for my PhD advisee at the time, Miguel Valerio, who couldn't be with us today, but whose chapter is in the book. He was able to, because you were willing to take a chance on him when I said, I have a graduate student, he just wrote a paper for a course that won an award at OSU, and I really think this has potential. And I think that someone had backed out last minute who was going to present on somewhere else in Latin America. And so it was kind of it could fill a gap, his chapters on Mexico. I guess I can speak more freely about him since he's not here, right? So because you were willing to, take a chance on him, he came, he presented, he got that published, and now he is an assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis, and his book is under contract with Cambridge University Press. So it really helped to launch his career. The feedback that he got there was tremendous. The support, I mean, it just really was wonderful to see that. So I think it does have that sort of potential, because that was actually built into the whole process of putting the book together, at least for him and for me.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have any questions or any comments from the contributors? Don't be shy, just go to the reactions at the bottom of the screen, and we have something. Júnia Furtado is just arriving, and then just for you to know, I'm not seeing anything coming from YouTube. And then let's go, folks. If nobody's going to ask anything, and if the if the contributors are still, I would say, shy to ask questions, then this is, of course, the idea is not to again praise the book, which I hope you have the opportunity to read and to see how rich the book is, and then reason why it's also difficult to ask specific questions. But one of the elements that two elements that I would like to ask regarding the overall framework of the book, and one of them is some of the choices, and Cécile refers to that in the introduction. She also did in her presentation. Then this choice that you have made of using the term African American, and also the term Black Atlantic. And I ask myself if you have this discussion in the introduction, but I would like you to develop a little bit more about how the Black Atlantic, and also this idea of African American instead of other terms that could be Black people, or people of African descent, or perhaps African Americans, which is the choice that you made. I would like you to develop a little bit more on that. Why this choice? And in which ways this concept, the notion of Black Atlantic, in which ways we embrace that, then instead of other approaches? For example, there is a little bit of discussion on creolization, on syncretism, but apparently you reject, or perhaps not, but you chose to not use the term African diaspora. Then I ask myself about that. The other question would be regarding the idea of the archive that is brought, and you mentioned the primary sources. The last part of the book is on primary sources as well. And Lisa also problematized that, the fact that when you are discussing, of course, rituals that involve the music, that involve the dance, most of what we have in a book, because of the limits of the support, is images and text. And I would like you to talk a little bit about what is this archive that you use beyond then the images and the text, and what kinds of challenges you may have had when then preparing the book and doing the kind of research that you do.
Yes, thank you. And I think, this is very much a great question for everybody to chime in, Michael in particular, for some of the introduction choices that we made together. But I want to say very simply, in a way that, at least in my thinking, using the term African American emerged as a choice that allowed to have this broad hemispheric view. And in a way, it sounds more provocative if you coming at it from a kind of North American tradition. But I think, you know, it's a point that we're making, and I think it is a good point because it serves our willingness or our kind of ambition, I suppose, in the book to bridge those boundaries, right? We're talking about the Americas as they were created by the slave trade, right? And in this regard, people coming from a particular area on the African continent could go anywhere between North and South, and together, you know, to talk about that experience, talking about an African American experience, I thought would be kind of a broad term that then can be refined when needed with more specific terms. And then what that movement creates, and in particular, when we keep in mind that it is a movement that you know, goes very much in two directions, in the circulation of ideas, in the circulation of people also, and practices and rituals. What that circulation creates is a Black Atlantic. And I think using it hemispherically and using it in a book that deals with the African continent very specifically and in you know, real connection with the Americas, yeah, is a little bit making a point about, you know, the limitations of what of some of the first iterations of the term has been, while, you know, still recognizing its usefulness. And so we are using it, or I am using it in this way. But Michael, tell me what you think.
Well, I think that's, I mean, I think that sums it up pretty clearly, but I was just gonna, a couple of things I was just thinking is the use of the word African American or Afro-American. I mean, there's also something, it seems to me, that using the term sticks the whole book in the debate that is sort of laid out in the introduction. That is to say, Melville Herskovits used that term, right, in the 30s, maybe the 20s, I don't even know, it's certainly in the 30s, to call what was then the sort of diasporic studies was called Afro-American studies, right? That's what he sort of used as the moniker. And it seems to me, by using a term that's not only everything that Cécile just said, but also sort of rooted in the interdisciplinary nature of the topic of study, it seems to me a really great way to sort of sort of send the message without, you know, explicitly saying it over and over and over again, which is to say that we are thinking about the Americas as a single continent, right? Not as a separated, bizarrely divided two continents that sometimes is three, maybe it's four, depending on how you think about it. But it's to think of this whole hemisphere as a place that would not exist were it not for indeed the Black Atlantic, right? The idea that all of these things coexist together and are interdependent and sort of drawing into that next part, right, which is the Black Atlantic. It's to suggest that it is indeed a new sort of constellation of existence, right? This new place that gets constructed, even when we're thinking about the Pacific side, right, of this blackness or of the Americas, because indeed this is how the enslaved were brought over, right, is through the Atlantic. So it's, you know, whether they ended up in Ecuador or Peru or anything else, or on the other side of Mexico or something like this, it seems to me that all of these are linked by way of the Atlantic, because that is where the travesty and the trek itself starts, right? So it does link all of them in a way, all of these areas, these giant areas, in a way that makes it particularly clear to anyone who knows what the term means, right? Which is, you know, ideal. Or if you don't, right? If one doesn't know what the term means, it does seem to me that it's a very clear way to talk about a region that could just be called the Atlantic. Sure, right? The whole Atlantic world is black in some ways, right? We could argue that, we could play that game, but it draws attention to what we're talking about, which is particularly related to race and particularly related to enslavement, right? and again, the Afro-American sort of term is to sort of deconstruct those national boundaries, but it's also a disciplinary, it seems to me, term, or precisely the opposite, right? Interdisciplinary term that reminds us that we're talking about this long history of stuff, and we're part of this debate. Sort of like another piece that's responding to everything that has happened before, plus hoping that others will respond to us. That's sort of how I see it.
Thank you. We have two people in the line. Then Sarika, you can just unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your, this is kind of wonderful, really stimulating book. And my question is for whoever would like to answer it, but it's inspired by Diane Stewart's chapter and her observation that African diasporic religions are typically seen as merely syncretic rather than kind of full-on real world religions. And it made me think also about how languages also have these hierarchies of what's a real religion, what's a real language versus a dialect, what's a creole, and there are value judgments and power plays around those ontologies, just as there are kind of narratives woven through decisions about who has history before about the 19th century, which you see playing out in, especially somewhere like the UK, where, say, there are history departments that are very large and have no Latin Americanists. So there are countries, regions that are not permitted to have ancient histories, just as there are places that seem to not have, whose religions aren't real. And I wonder whether this sort of kind of ontologies of performance and language and how they allow, how kind of disciplines kind of play a part in creating them, whether the work that you've all been doing on Afro-Catholic festivals can also explicitly speak back to disciplines like religious studies and anthropology and say, well, actually, the experiential kind of ontology and kind of meanings of our archive suggest that, your fields can also take these kinds of methods and questions back to the study of Catholicism or Protestantism in Europe or whatever elsewhere. I hope that's coherent enough for someone to have something fun to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I don't know who wants to respond, to react.
I'm happy to respond. Thank you, Sarika, for that wonderful, wonderful question. And in many respects, it reflects so many of the themes that I take up with my graduate students year after year after year. How we are being disciplined by these disciplines. And of course, the limitations of language, right? We've been talking a lot about the opacity of Black religions, not just because of the fact that in all religious traditions, in all encounters, something will always remain opaque. There is so much that is not translatable, yet what we've learned and what we've developed in our intellectual habits since the Enlightenment is this posture that we should be able to translate and know everything, everything and anything. And so I think it's such a critical question. And I believe, I'm hopeful because of the courage and the kind of intrepid analyses and interdisciplinary work, which this volume represents, that many of my graduate students and other graduate students I'm seeing today are willing to take on. So I think you're absolutely right. And in many respects, I might be the outlier here because I am trained in the fields of religion and theology. And so I am in this continual ongoing dialogue with my field. And there are many in my field. And as you know, Sarika, religious studies was really founded on anthropology, theology, or theologians turned phenomenologists of religion, and philologists. And so anthropology is deeply embedded in the very field itself. But although there are many in my field that would love to talk about how much we've moved on from those colonial pitfalls, we really haven't. We actually have not. And the stratification of religious traditions is still very much established in our disciplines, in our conversations, in our scholarship. So I just want to affirm that I am also trying to raise and understand these questions. And it's really interesting because earlier in my career, I often turned to linguistics. I liked some of the terms as grammars and lexicons, and I've moved away from that over time. And it's really interesting because I teach a course called Black Love, and I get a lot of different Black students who are children of recent African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants in that class. And it's really interesting because I was fighting my African students on why they should not call African languages dialects. And I mean languages, right? And why using the term tribe indiscriminately, and I sent them to Ngogi wa Thiong'o, but why using the term tribe indiscriminately is so problematic, to the African historian. It is just inaccurate. And so I think you're right. History, anthropology, religion, the disciplines share in that legacy. And it's really interesting because as I've been listening to Michael and Cécile talk about, and even Anna raise the question of the Black Atlantic, something that I feel is compelling me even more. Excuse me, I did not realize that my computer was not plugged in. Give me a second. Something that has been compelling me even more is some of the Afro-pessimist theorizations and discourses about Blackness. And I used to think Blackness and Africanness were different. And in some respects they are, but I have begun to understand how they are the same as a result of their contributions to analyzing the anti-Blackness that is the undergirding structure of the modern West, the Western world, the world we've been given. So that's even another aspect that's compelling me. So yes, my point is I agree with you. And I think two things. So one of the things I do, which a lot of practitioners might not like, is I make the argument that these traditions are religions because I want African heritage religions to be at the table of conversation. Not just because I want them to be, or for any issues of racial pride or anything like that, but because I really believe the world needs them. I really believe that saving our world means engaging the thought systems, the ideals of indigenous religions globally, including African heritage religions. So that's one thing that's really important to me. And if I don't talk about how the phenomena that we study in the quote unquote monotheistic religions, the revealed religions of the books, whatever it is, we also see similar phenomena in indigenous religions, then they don't become part of the table of conversation. But I think the other response, it's like when my students said in reading Ross Michael Brown's book, African Atlantic Cultures in South Carolina Low Country, I still don't understand what the Simbi are. I'm like, that's perfect. That's exactly where I expect you to be because you cannot understand it. There is no translatable term. There is no appropriate term that will help you to understand it. So what you have to do is read and reread this book and continue to read other sources until you begin to get a sense of what the Simbi are. You should not leave this course knowing what they are. I'm happy that you don't think you know what they are. Right? So it's all that great sociolinguistic data that scholars are using, indigenous linguistic concepts. I think that turn is another turn that will challenge those taxonomies, challenge those stratification, those tables of stratification. The more we dig into, I don't let my students use terms like witchcraft. One of my students was working on Ghana, and I said, what is the word that the indigenous people use? I don't care if the anthropologists say, well, when I go there, they say the word fetish. They're saying the word fetish because they're talking to you in French. But when they're talking in Kikongo, they're not saying the word fetish. So I say, what is the indigenous term that they use? And in doing that, he had to unlock ideas. I mean, let alone the fact that the term witchcraft has been already was signified upon through, the whole conquering of Europe, that, Christian colonial empire in Europe. But in doing that, he had to unlock just a whole conceptual world that would not have been unlocked if he used the term witchcraft. So I think that turn is going to help us. And I think we still have to fight in some ways, and maybe I'm undermining myself here, I don't know, for a place at the table of these disciplines. I don't know, I've probably gone on too long, sorry. But I love the question, would be happy to continue to talk.
Thank you, that's awesome.
Thank you. We have a question coming from Jessica. Then I will, Jessica, go ahead and unmute yourself because you are the only in the line.
Hi, hello everyone. I almost didn't want to come on the heels of that because that was such a rich and ranging answer. Thank you so much for that, Diane. And thank you all the contributors for sharing your work and for giving it to us and offering it to us as a way to think about this topic. I have a question that is, in some ways, a question has already come up, and I say this as somebody who is very invested in Black diasporic communities that would regard themselves as Afro-Catholic or are practicing some version of Catholicism, and also innovating it in all the ways that we see, becomes these festivals and celebrations and lifeways and other ways of thinking about the world. And so I'm coming to this as like a comrade. And so I'm thinking about the ways that, texts like this, even just the structure of this book, as Cécile laid out, really challenge the ways we think about syncretism. I mean, I saw, mentioning Herskovits brings up, of course, so many different things, and also challenges. So internally, it challenges the way we think about syncretism, but it also challenges the way that we think about African diaspora broadly, or the making of a Black Atlantic or Black people across the Americas, like history, whatever we want to frame it, the dispersion of people of African descent, African people of African descent. It makes us think about that story differently. And I'm always struck by how our conversations end up getting set so far. It feels like it. I mean, again, I'm coming as comrades, I'm hoping that maybe I'm among kinfolk. Our conversations about these things, about the Caribbean, about the Spanish and Portuguese world, or even the Francophone world, about Catholic ways of revising, Afro-Catholic, African Catholic ways of revising, ideas of, worlds otherwise, or the human, or sociality, Blackness itself. They always seem so far set apart from what becomes sort of a mainstream line about what is Blackness and what is this Black Atlantic, and it's very Anglophone and sort of one note. And I just wonder about, I'm excited. I'm always excited for more of these texts that really challenge that sort of, dominant drumbeat. And I wonder also about, in your imagining of the work this book will do, but also the work that you all are doing in your own capacities, what is the new narrative that, and I would love for you guys even to talk to each other, what is the new narrative that you would want written about Blackness in the Americas, Africans in the Americas? Not just necessarily revising, okay, add us to that Anglophone story, but also how does this text, your work, your research, your individual contributions change fundamentally how we think about Africans in the Americas broadly? So I'll just leave. I would love to hear from all the contributors, anybody who ever wants to talk.
Thank you, Jessica. Who wants to react?
Well, I can start, but I hope to hear from some of you guys also on this. And I think, Jessica, that's such a great, a great point to bring into the conversation, because what's, struck to me was the ways in which what happened in the construction of the volume was, in a way, very humble from every one of the participants, right, of the authors, because I think we were each using our discipline in which we were trained, maybe more than another discipline, but in a way that, you know, was so aware of its limitations with regards to what we need from other methodologies in terms of answering our question. And so what emerged from that humble approach was actually a humbling of the disciplines, like showing that they are limited and they're flawed, and they're not telling us what we want to hear, what we need to hear, and not, you know, at all everything that that we need to hear. And I think, you know, that's part of the point, and that, you know, also happens in terms of the geographies and in terms of the languages, right? That if you look at this kind of Central African inspired festivals, it doesn't make any sense to think in terms of you know, English-speaking Americas or Spanish-speaking Americas, because, you know, that is not the hinge on which the conversation works. And so it's really putting us like at the, you know, in front of the wall of, you know, what do we do from there without throwing the baby with the bathwater, but really in, you know, being challenging to ourselves and to our disciplines. And I'm going to popcorn to Jeroen if he would like to tell us about, you know, your own trajectory into these topics, because in a way you come from, you know, even further in terms of disciplines and, you know, training. So, you know, what do you think?
Yeah, would love to follow up on that, Cécile, and maybe before I speak about myself, because I don't want to be, you know, put myself here at the center, but I do think there's a point to be made that is of importance, because in the title of the book, the word Americas is highlighted, right? Yet at the same time, I do believe that one of the strengths of this publication is that it also forces us to look at Africa with different eyes, right? And a couple of times the term syncretism was brought up in the conversation up to now. And syncretism is, of course, a term that traditionally we have associated with the Americas, right? A country like Brazil, right? Identifying itself as this nation, you know, that was built out of syncretism, so to speak. It's a term that consistently has been associated with the Caribbean. But what this book shows is that, you know, many of the traditions that in past decades scholars have deemed to be syncretic in the sense that they were born in the Americas, what this book shows is that much of what was brought by the enslaved to the Americas was already syncretic in nature, right? And that it makes a lot of sense for us to also apply the term syncretism to African cultures, right? And to move away from this tendency to associate Africa with authenticity, with purity, but to look at it, you know, from this perspective of syncretic developments that already early on were taking place on the African continent. But speaking a little bit about myself, since you encouraged me to do so, Cécile, indeed, right? So my background was not in history. I came to the field through the field of literary and linguistic studies, with a focus originally on the case of New Netherlands, the formerly Dutch colony in Manhattan. Before it became New York, right? It was a Dutch colony in the 17th century. And writing a book more specifically on the topic of Pinkster, an Afro-New Yorker tradition whereby the enslaved would take advantage of the annual Pentecost holiday to celebrate and elect their own king, and then parade with the king through town and all of that. And it was in the context of that research that by accident, I stumbled upon a source in a New York newspaper about New Orleans. a source also about a king election and a king parade that took place in New Orleans on Congo Square. And luckily, I didn't discard the source. I kept it with me, and then looked at it more carefully after I finished my book on Pinkster, only to find out that this was actually quite a fascinating source. It was an unknown source, because people so far had been looking for sources on New Orleans traditions in New Orleans. And nobody thought of going to an archive in New York and to look for traces there of something what was celebrated in New Orleans. And it allowed me to also bring a new perspective on the famous performances that used to take place on Congo Square in New Orleans, this iconic place where on Sundays the enslaved were able to gather and celebrate, and where if today you would go to Congo Square, you would see a sign on Congo Square, a sign that says in big letters, this is the place where the Mardi Gras Indians were born. The Mardi Gras Indians, many of you may be familiar with the tradition, an African-American tradition with music and dance taking place during the Mardi Gras celebrations, with a specific characteristic, namely the fact that participants would dress themselves with an abundance of feathers. A tradition that in past decades had always been explained by making a connection to Native Americans, right? Because if we see people wearing feathers, what comes to mind is Native Americans, right? And having this new connection that allowed me to compare what happened in New Orleans to what happened in Manhattan, and to compare it also to the Caribbean and to Brazil, then allowed me in the book to present a new interpretation by associating the Mardi Gras Indians to dancing festivals that would take place in the Congo region, the so-called sangas or sangamentos, where indeed participants would also use an abundance of feathers when they would perform in these mock war performances, and that allowed me then to present a new perspective. And I'm definitely very grateful to Cécile that she allowed me to present that and to include it in her book. And the good news is that meanwhile this chapter has become a book. And so if you want to know more about the Mardi Gras Indians and these Congo perspective on the Mardi Gras Indians, now there is an entire book available on that topic.
Thank you, Jeroen. I don't know if we have any questions. If not, then I will just then take the question that the comments that Jeroen just did, and perhaps try to connect with some of the elements that are in the book as well, because when you are referring to the Black Atlantic or the Atlantic world, you are always referring to these encounters and exchanges between the Europe, Africa, and the Americas. And of course, that all these festivals, they have this African component, if you want to say that way, and also the contributions of the indigenous populations that made contributions, for example, to Candomblé or to other African-based religions, and also Catholicism, which is one of the Christian religions that is treated in the book, but not the only one. And I'd like you perhaps also to refer to these other components than indigenous, also European. I know that the chapter by Lisa, that she examines these representations of the African kings and the embassies. Many of these passes through Portugal as well. Then I would like to ask if any of you would like to develop a little bit more on these other dimensions that are not only African diasporic, but also refer to contributions of Europe and the indigenous populations of the Americas.
Lisa, did you want to jump in, or?
Sure, I can. And it's just so great to be here with people whose work has been so inspiring to me, and hearing Jeroen's that connection to Mardi Gras Indians was something that was so helpful and clarifying to me. I actually want to reflect just for a moment on what Cécile was saying about the disciplinary restrictions and the interdisciplinarity of the volume as a whole. In some ways, I felt this was an opportunity for me to work on a text that I had encountered in research related to another book, but that was more secondary because that book was focused in part on Minas Gerais and in Brazil, in the interior of Brazil, where I was focusing on festive traditions there. And I had come across this account of the embassy in Bahia. And so it was an opportunity to work on that and really do kind of a close reading of it that ended up being probably my most literary studies sort of approach to, that is my formation. But I think working in this field, you end up mixing a lot of disciplines, and it's not necessarily easy to tease out. But certainly in the revisions to it, I think Cécile or maybe the readers encouraged me to bring that out even more. And it really was quite illuminating for me. So I agree with what she says about it being humbling and recognizing the limitations of your discipline. But in a way, doing that sort of close reading and really embracing it as a literary text and what it encourages us to speculate about what, this is a Portuguese author writing and publishing in Portugal about this African embassy in Bahia. But there were so many speculative parts of that allowed me to think about this issue of representation, the representation of African kings and festivals in Brazil more broadly. So the question that Cécile started with, like, what are these festivals? Are they tools of oppression? Is that how they work, or are they? We emphasized a lot more how you can see these festivals as instances of autonomy, relative freedom or empowerment, expression, that sort of thing. And there was a way in which that close reading of that account that's so centered around issues of representation and whether an ambassador represents a king, what that distance, basically, just to summarize quickly, when there's greater distance in these representations, when they are really truly seen as by European or Euro-American observers as mock kings, right? When that is what was safe. When they were unsafe was when that it seemed that the people representing kings in festivals actually did have power within their communities and authority, or could lead to a rebellion. That's when it was deemed unsafe. And I think that point just became clear to me in working through this kind of close reading of a text where so many passages in it hinged on ideas of representation and recognition. I won't go into it any further, but that I think that kind of responds both to some things that Cécile brought up earlier and your question, Anna, about what to do with a European text by a European author very far removed from what he's writing about, but what it still can enable us to see. And of course, he's writing in a context where there were such festive practices and embassies in an earlier period in Portugal. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I can maybe, Anna, I can add to this a little bit, if I may. Going back to your question about basically what is African, what is indigenous, what is European, right? As kind of the different ingredients of those festivals, and I think one of the ways in which the conversation developed that was interesting is really for us to realize the extent to which any of the elements could escape identification in different ways because of the use that was made of it. So that some things that were nominally European were actually part of the most the most African aspect of it in some regards. And so that's really striking because, of course, it's, it brings into play something that should be obvious, which is the fact that those kind of cultural manifestations are extremely complex, and they're messy, and they're evolving, and they're being created and recreated over time, and that we can't have a snapshot of it in any of our approaches. But in a way, because of the kind of nature of the historiography, I would say, or the nature of the types of work that has been done of those sources, we are just at the moments where we can, go beyond the, the instinct and really the necessity to identify and to label and to classify and, to let the messiness of it speak and offer itself as spaces of analysis that, will put into play all of these elements. And I think the question of the indigenous dimension is really crucial, and it's one that appears perhaps the most in the book in Miguel Barrerio's chapter on, an event in very early 16th century Mexico, where you have that very explicit triangulation between the realm of the indigenous, the realm of the Europeans, and then those Africans who actually came from Europe that are able to negotiate a place for themselves within the European realm in a way that challenges the old colonial project from the get-go, and in this way it is so interesting.
And maybe if I may, Cécile, making also a connection to Michael's chapter, because the book, I think an important aspect of the book also is that it encourages and even challenges us to rethink Catholicism, right? And to the point that we're encouraged to see Catholicism also as an African religion, and that it was perceived as such by many of the enslaved, which I think is an element that Michael so greatly also stressed in his chapters. I'm not sure, Michael, if you want to say a few words about that.
I suppose, one of the things I remember, one of the reviewers told me that I took a postmodern bite out of my own rump or something at the end of the chapter, because basically I suggest at the end of the chapter that it's like a game. Playing the game of where does it come from? Is it African? Is it indigenous? Is it European? And you go, well, Catholicism is sort of European, but it sort of starts in Africa, but sort of, and you go like, well, what are we doing? What is what is this game? Is the fact that people use popcorn to celebrate Obaluaye or São Roque in Brazil, is that indigenous because popcorn is from the American, okay, it's popcorn. Yes, it comes from the indigenous who made this thing because, corn comes from the Americas, but is it, so it starts to get to be like this thing where I say game, but it's a serious game, right? As Sherry Orker says, but it's a game in which there are states, right? So the interpretation you have, you're showing your cards, right? The way you interpret popcorn, for instance, in this stupid example I just brought up, it tells you what you're trying to say. Maybe it comes from Europe, right? So whatever it is, it's not about where things really came from, right? It's really about where we want to say they came from in some ways, right? It's an interpretive project that is important. And I do think it's important to say, well, yes, maybe that shows us that if we say, again, popcorn example, if we say that indigenous influence helped create this tradition of Afro diasporic celebration of a Yoruba deity, then we're trying to show that there was this sort of early mixture, to not use syncretism here, but sort of this early creation of a new tradition, right? We could say in the Americas. That's an important point to make. But you could also just as well say, well, they use popcorn, but they, prior to that, they used something else and they just substituted it because it was easier to get a hold of than whatever you could find in West Africa. That's not unimportant either. I guess my point is simply that this sort of tying in the three races of Brazil, for instance, or anywhere else, right? We could point to things that, I mean, one of the things that I do in my own research is sort of point to Allan Kardec, right, as an important point of a lot of my work in the interior of Brazil is on Catholic patron saints, right? And a lot of stuff comes from Spiritism. Is that French then? Sure, I guess, maybe not, but maybe it's Brazilian. So it just starts to be like a thing where it's not. I find it to be an interesting and important and a worthwhile game, but in the end, it's really more about strategically pointing out origins or political positions, really, than it is about something that's sort of tangible and who created the thing. And well, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Maybe it was a British guy who was visiting Brazil who decided to throw popcorn, and someone said, "That's a great idea. Let's do that." Right? I mean, I don't. So it doesn't. But it's insignificant, right? Because it doesn't matter who started it. It matters what's it. And this is the anthropologist, sort of ethnomusicologist in me, asking, well, what does it mean, right? So it's not so much about where it comes from as much as it is what does it mean at each specific moment, right? So it's not just now, but in 1750 when people noted this. I don't know if that's true, by the way. I made up a number, but let's say 19th century, because I know that is true, that popcorn is associated with the 19th century. What does it mean at that point, right? And what does it mean today? This sort of thing. I think that's really that's what most interests me about sort of looking at this, is thinking about how people are connected by their traditions and also how they think about their traditions. That's sort of, I don't know. That's all I have to say sort of about that.
Thank you. You have Sarika.
Dangerous combination of enthusiasm and non-specialism. I wonder if anyone would like to maybe say something about how your sources do or kind of don't give us ways of thinking about early modern sensibilities for kind of ideas about virtuosity or aesthetics, kind of what does that intersection of, say, art and religion look like in the ways in which people perform and the ways in which that's kind of described and goals, the ways of doing things, and how they might strengthen power or authority, or kind of how much one needs to practice or have other forms of expertise for being in festivals?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I know, Junia, you're having, I can see internet problems, but that if you can come in on this, that would be great, because I think, the aesthetic dimension is something that, let's say, I'll see if Junia jumps in. If not, I do have thoughts.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
Sorry, I'm not in a very good place. I'm with my parents, but I'm hearing everything. Yes, my chapter is about what I try to look at mostly is the question that I came to write the article. It's about two African descendants that comes back to Africa. And in fact, they write a report, which is a very, it's not well explored, this report. And the sensation and the description that they make of Africa, it's of completely, what I try to show is that they are completely aware of this kind of costumes in Brazil, because I have a lot of documents in Tejuco. One of them lives in Tejuco and the other in Salvador of Bahia, where the majority of the population is from Africa and mostly from the Maina coast, from Dahomey, and they were chosen because they were able to speak the language, but the report is completely they think everything is strange, everything is very barbaric, everything is terrible. So I try to understand this is And I think as historians, we must be suspicious of the rhetoric that are on the text. And the rhetoric is a rhetoric of someone who wants to be connected with the Luso-Brazilian elite. And despite being aware of the food, the feasts, the habits, the drinking, they all the time describes Africa as a place of barbarism, very savage. So with a negative tone, with austerity, they are completely marked by the austerity. So the aesthetic is completely of the austerity. It's not it's not our culture, and denying and also blaming everything they saw as a symbol of rusticity, of savagery. And I try to show that it's a rhetoric, it's not the truth. And it's a way of comprehend the Luso-Brazilian African empire in the beginning of the racial hierarchical places of the empire. So that's what I try to make. I'm sorry, I'm not in a good place, but I wouldn't miss. It's Saturday. I have I have the responsibility over my parents, and I had to bring them to lunch.
Thank you, Junia. Thank you. I think that is interesting what Junia brings in this response, and also in her article, which is in dialogue with Lisa's article, because we have then two different directions here. Then when Mascarenhas writes about that embassy in Bahia, that is the first written report about these relations, because there were many letters that were exchanged among these kings and ambassadors, but this was a first journalistic report about that embassy. It's very clear in one portion of that report when he talks about the fact that the ambassadors who would spend very long time in Bahia, they would then do their own rights. Then during their stay in Bahia, they didn't accept offers in terms of clothing and so on. They preferred to stay dressed in African way, between quotation marks, and perform their own rituals, including sacrificing animals and so on. And then we have this other report by the two priests who go to the Daomé, and they give a totally different impression. This idea that Junia mentioned, this idea that what they were seeing was in many ways unknown, and that they were shocked when we have another report in a different place in Brazil, when these same ambassadors are there, then performing their rights freely. I think that we have someone, okay, I don't see anybody who wants to ask a question. Then if you have questions, perhaps you can just go ahead and raise your hands. There was someone who just entered the meeting, but I don't see anything. Okay, I have something in the chat. And then I read, because this is going to be recorded, and this is a really wonderful conversation. This is coming from Anania Kabir, a truly fitting complement to the book. I just wanted to flag up that in 2 weeks' time, Cécile will be in conversation with Cécile Hamsami, historian of creolized religions in Mascarene Islands in the Indian Ocean, on the cultural platform Tinai Creole. I have co-founded with the Franco-Tamil author. Then you are all invited, and she left the the link on Facebook. This is going to be at 3 p.m. on June the 5th, and it's going to be live on Facebook. Any more questions or comments, please?
I was just thinking on, as you were bringing our two chapters together with Junia, and I was thinking as Junia was speaking, how important it is to read against the grain and against the rhetoric, right? To question that what are the rhetorical purposes of that account, and which is so essential. And one of the readings that's been done of the Mascarenhas account that you referred to and that I discuss is that it's a critique of the Viceroy of Brazil, so that it has to do with sort of, again, these inter-elite conflicts. But if you have to be skeptical of that rhetoric as well and look beyond it in both cases. So it's you also end up note, if you think beyond that rhetoric to what was actually being performed and people's reception of it, and the resistance to the imposition of Portuguese customs, as you've highlighted, you get at a very different sort of reading. But anyway, it's just I think another example of how important it is to bring these texts. We talk a lot about the limitations of texts representing these festive encounters or images. It's limited, but when we do have them, we have to bring them together and put them into dialogue.
Okay, let's see if we have any more questions or any more comments, or if Cécile has anything that she would like to add.
I'm just so thankful to everybody for being here. And, I think it's so great to think of the ways in which this conversation already is, growing into, more books and more interrogations. And, I think it's really heartwarming to see that there is growing interest, right? And in those topics, and that we are able to, take them seriously and to give them the attention that they need. Yeah, I see, Diane, you have your hands raised.
Yes, thank you. I just thought that I should probably say, since this is a group of probably mostly historians, that every time I read, and I saw it again when I was looking over the intro for today, that Herskovits kind of won out, in this debate between Herskovits and Fraser. I always want to say, not in my field, not in my field. I just want to say that this kind of interdisciplinary work is so important. And I just want to call attention to, particularly me as a scholar of religion, who was trained in the United States, primarily in Black and womanist theologies, decolonial theologies, and in broader religious studies with an emphasis on African-American religion and culture. Most of the people in my field take for granted an African-American, especially when talking about the United States Christian past, which is just a fallacy in terms of the slave period. It's just not true. But that is the historiography of African-American religiosity in the United States, in the region that became the United States. And, we've had great interventions from people like Michael Gomez and the historians, Margaret Washington Creel, you name it. But I just want to call attention to the fact that in religion, particularly for those trained in North America, we are so behind because we have collapsed religious identity and heritage and culture with a kind of temporality that begins with the Great Awakenings, which is just so limited and so problematic. So I want to thank, Cécile for inviting me in. In fact, when Cécile first asked me to present at Yale, I said, well, I don't know if I really do anything with Catholicism, do I? And then I was like, oh my goodness, yes, there's something I'm working on right now that really does. I am making some points about Catholicism, but really I enjoy being in these spaces because because of my inquiries, I have had to turn to archives, I've had to turn to history and to ethnography, to collecting qualitative data in order to study the religious imagination of people of African descent. I've had to do that. And my field still doesn't have all of the tools and the insights that it really needs to provide a much more comprehensive historiography, comprehensive treatment of the religious heritages and cultures of people of African descent, particularly in the United States. So I just thought I should say that, because people might be assuming that, oh, you know, we're right where you historians are, and we're not. I remember my great friend and colleague Tracy Hutz was at Joseph Miller's NEH seminar with a whole bunch of Africanist historians. And she said, you have to understand that you all assume that these people are African when they end up in the diaspora. In my field, you know, it's like we're seeing them coming off of slave ships, belting out spirituals, not even taking into consideration the fact that most people of African descent in the diaspora are not even Protestant, right? Are officially Catholic. There is such an Afro-Protestant narrative, especially with a US-centered focus. So I just wanted to really thank the group and just kind of inform you that we have something to bring as religion scholars. There's no doubt about it, that historians and social scientists don't bring, but we have not been as Atlantic world oriented as we need to be. And we have not been divested of our fidelity to a kind of Christian theological, even the historians who would beg to say that they're not, attachment to this very comforting narrative. And it's a narrative that fits into the politics of respectability as well, right? Which African Americans really didn't have much of a choice not to take on. And so we just still need a lot of work done. So I just wanted to share that and to say that this is all the more reason I really love being in these kinds of conversations with interdisciplinary scholars and great historians, as many of you are. So thank you.
Yes, but thank you so much, Diane. And the good news is that none of us have to do it alone, right? That's the beauty of it. That we're stronger together, right? To finish on a Care Bear note.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all who participated. Thank you, Cécile, and the contributors. Then for those of you who are arriving now, this is the book that we are discussing today, Afro-Catholic Festivals in the Americas, Performance Representation in the Making of Black Atlantic Tradition, edited by Cécile Fromont. And I would like to invite you for our next session that is going to happen on June the 2nd, which is our traditional time, that is on Wednesdays, Wednesday at 5 p.m. Then you are going to discuss again another edited book by historians, three of them, Alex Baruch, David Eltis, and Dave DeWitt. And the title of the book is From the Galleons to the Highlands and Slave Trade Routes in the Spanish Americas. And this is a book published by University of New Mexico Press last year. And you are all invited to attend. You just go to slaveryarchive.wordpress.com and you are going to find the program there and you can register to attend on Zoom. Once again, thank you so much for all those who took the Saturday to be here with us, and thank you for the contributors and the